Hey, watercolor class. So this video is just a brief demonstration on our midterm project, which is called "What's in the Water, What's in the Air." And for this project, which includes written instructions, we're going to be exploring the idea of making painting from collage-based material. So everyone will be making a collage first, and then using it as the basis for the painting. And there are different methods one can use to enlarge the collage, transfer it to a larger working format. But anyway, I wanted to mention first the collage process. Now most of us have access to printers. If if you don't, if you have access to old books or magazines that you could find images in, that would be good. Worst case scenario, if you have no books or old magazines to cut up and you can't print things out from a computer, what you can do is pull up images from the internet on the computer and then literally trace them off on paper, like what I did here. So this is literally paper taped to the screen and the computer, images traced off, and then that can be cut and assembled into a larger, more complex collage. Image of a hermit crab and landscape. So that's always a possibility if you're really having trouble finding resources. But this will be important because it's your reference point, and it will allow you to create more complex imagery without having to do a super elaborate preparatory study or drawing. So I have two images that I printed out, and I've already taped them together. And then in the directions, I mentioned that the project should include at least 3 different references, so you can't just find a photograph and paint the photograph. You have to actually construct a reality, a visual reality from different sources. And that's very integral and important to the project. So I have 2 sources here, and these basically serve as kind of a backdrop because it's about, one could choose water as a primary theme, one could use sky as a primary theme. I've decided to use both. So this is basically kind of like a cross section. Here's the sky, the landscape, and then here's the water. You're looking at the water just below the surface of this lake. And then the other thing that is important to the assignment is to integrate at least um, yeah, 3 references. So 1, 2. So then I have found some other materials. This would be the 3rd reference. So this would actually be meeting the assignment requirements where I have 1, 2, and then 3, and then I want to just assemble these things in interesting ways, layer them. You should consider the idea that you're making a foreground, a middle ground, and a background. So if I had these 3 elements, this becomes my foreground if I superimpose it over these other visual elements. And then this would be my middle ground because it's kind of in this middle space. And then this above ground landscape would serve as kind of a background or backdrop. So I've got, if I literally just took this and made a painting from just exclusively these 3 components, that would be adequate. What I would suggest is to cut out a few things. It's important to cut them out and really you got to really be concerned about the contours. If they're interesting looking to you and you can kind of visualize painting them, then they're probably good. I wouldn't choose anything super complex, but something that you would enjoy painting that has a nice strong kind of graphic impact when you lay it into say a backdrop like this. So I cut out a few additional things, and I've been playing around with them a little bit to see how they might fit into this landscape. And this is kind of plastic plastic sleeve for, a 6-pack of, Budweiser or something. These are really kind of dangerous elements in the waterways because fish and different aquatic life get caught in them. Anyway, this I was trying to figure out how to put in there. I sort of like the bridge. I think it's important to bridge top and the bottom. So this could actually be used as a bridge. It makes more sense to be down underwater, but I'm making my own reality. So I could potentially use it up here and perhaps anchor it somehow. I feel like the composition is just a little bit naked with exclusively the fish. And so I thought maybe the fish would be helped along if I included one other element, but I'm just unsure where to put it. So perhaps something like that. And then I just have to find a good placement for the fish. There's an old car here that's kind of cool in the middle ground. I'd like to have the fish overlap. If you can overlap things, then you can create this more of a sense of space. If things are not overlapped, it's harder to create any kind of sense of space. Even if it's not realistic space, you need to have pictorial space. So I'm looking for ways to create pictorial space. I think that I'm going to go, for the moment, I think I'm just going to go with a fish, and I want to just find a placement for the fish that isn't too awkward. So I just have to play around with it for a moment and decide what I want to do. The fish is really the subject, and then everything else becomes kind of background material. I think, I'm going to stay pretty pure with this and just use the fish, big rainbow trout. Now, this is important to me because I was trying to, you know, create some kind of justification. Why would I want to do this? And I'm thinking, well, I've been very concerned by the recent fires, certainly always concerned by the state of our oceans and rivers and waterways. And just recently, my childhood playground up in the mountains east of Salem, I grew up in Oregon, totally burnt to the ground. Detroit Lake, the community of Detroit, burnt to the ground, completely gone as I know it. And that's enough for me. That's enough to give me justification to just want to paint this because I have these associations. There's the car represents a kind of wreckage, and obviously there's this roiling sky in the background, and then the landscape is just reminiscent of the shores of the lake up there. So that gives me enough justification to want to do this. Somewhere I have the nose of the fish, and so I'll tape that on too. All right. So the next step is to scale, transfer the image to paper, scale it up basically. This could be done on something this scale. I think it would be more interesting if it were bigger. So I think I would want to scale it up. And the assignment actually requires that your working format, your paper is 16 inches in at least 16 inches in both dimensions. So the smallest it could be would be a 16-inch square. So with that in mind, then I need to scale this up in some way. And I could do a pie grid by dividing this into 8 equal components or more, just by doing diagonal and horizontal lines. I could also do a right angle grid by measuring this off in 1-inch increments. And then enlarging those 1-inch increments, probably this would double in size, so that if this is right now, if it's, say we trim it down to 10, just to have an even number, 10 inches by 14 inches, and I wanted to measure this, I wanted to enlarge this by double, it would go up to 20 by 28 inches because it's 14 inches long. So then I could do a 1-inch grid over this to a 2-inch grid on an actual piece of watercolor paper. It's a little bit tedious, but if you're challenged with your drawing skills, it's a way to get very accurate information recorded. And I would suggest doing it. The only downside is that you have to erase your grid lines before you paint, or else they'll just be there, and it's not very appealing. As long as you have a line around the border of a shape, then it looks great. Um, but if you have a line that's intersecting a shape, then it doesn't look so good. It makes it look really shallow, and kind of undermines that sense of form. So keep that in mind. Um, okay, going to the enlargement process. Okay, so I have enlarged my grid now, and I decided that I didn't need to have a 1-inch grid across this collage. That would just be overkill. I think I can figure out what's going on within a larger square here. So this is a 2-inch grid. And then I had to get out my phone calculator and work a little bit because I wanted to use the maximum amount of paper as possible. So I figured out that this grid, these square units would enlarge up to 3.25%, which is 3¼ inches. So now I have this, this format enlarged here with the same number of squares. And then it's always good to double check. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. If you don't have the same amount of squares, it's a useless exercise. It has to be a kind of 1-to-1, and that will allow you to enlarge properly. And then once you get started, you can start anywhere, but once you get something on the paper, then it works out fine. So I think I'll just do the fish, just do the outline of the fish. So see, the tail begins 1, 2, 3 squares over and 2 squares down. And so I just have to draw what I see within this square. And it's something like that. And then it intersects across here. And I can clean this up later, but this gives me just a really good generalized proportion. So you still have to pay attention, certainly. But this keeps you from getting way out of whack. And you could draw it any way you want it, upside down, right side up, doesn't matter. I'm just totally just following, these grid lines, having to make a few corrections. And then the nose of the fish comes all the way down to the 2 squares in and about halfway down. And then like that. Like I said, I can redraw it. I can correct it once I have the whole kind of contour scoped in, but that gives me just the right scale. And I might want to play around with proportions just a little bit, but I'm very confident that that is where it's supposed to be. And then of course there are these internal sorts of markings, this sort of thing. And then I just, draw them as I would normally. And yes, certainly there always are corrections. And then you just can't get too excited. You can't start like filling everything in. You just get the essential contours, all the important details. But here I have already something plotted on, and I know that it is in perfect proportion with what the rest of the composition needs to be. So that's a good way to get started, especially if you're drawing challenged, because it just keeps you in check. It keeps you from, getting overwhelmed with all that information. And you're still drawing observationally, but you just are narrowing it proportions down to within what's happening with these individual squares. So you can draw over here a little while, draw over here a little while, then you just ultimately connect the dots. Okay, so that's enough to get started. And then when you're done, you want to go and erase all of these grid lines. So you just have only a contour. And then you can, and that's a good time to kind of clean up the drawing and make sure you have everything where it needs to be. Before I do that, of course, I want to plot in the rest of my information there so that I don't lose it. But that's not a bad way to get going, and it keeps the individual on task. It keeps you from getting lazy by just going, I know how that looks. This keeps you kind of really looking and really being careful in terms of proportion. When you paint it, of course, you can just go crazy, but if you're wanting to maintain the proportions of your original design, this is a good way to do it without the aid of projectors and all these other tools that we might have um, in the painting studio. If we're just here in our rooms, all we have is a ruler and some paper and pencil and eraser and a couple other things. And so we have to do stuff like this. This has been around forever. This is as old as the Renaissance, this enlargement system. Okay,